Some men are born to rule. Others are born to burn everything down for the woman who dares to defy them. She had 3 seconds to run. She knew it in the marrow of her bones, in the cold sweat sliding down the back of her neck, in the way the man across the room looked at her. Not with anger, not with surprise, but with something infinitely more terrifying. Recognition. He had catalogued her in an instant, her face, her fear, the way she gripped the doorframe as though it could save her from what he was. The glass of bourbon in his hand didn't tremble. His jaw didn't tighten. He simply looked at her the way a predator looks at the moment before the strike. Not with urgency, but with patience. He had all the time in the world. She had 3 seconds, and she wasted all of them staring back. His voice, when it finally came, was low and unhurried, like smoke curling from a fire that had been burning for a very long time. "Close the door," he said. "You're not going anywhere." And God help her, she closed the door. Hello and welcome to a new story. I hope you will enjoy it. Don't forget to subscribe. Now let's dive into lines. Chapter 1. The Wrong Room. The night Valentina Cruz walked into Nikolai Sorokin's private study was the night she stopped being invisible. She hadn't meant to be there. That was the cruelest part. The sheer stupid accident of it. She'd been hired as extra catering staff for the Marchetti Foundation Gala, one of 40 servers in white shirts and black trousers, moving like ghosts through the gilded halls of the Sorrento estate. The event was one of those spectacularly hollow celebrations of wealth that the ultra-rich stage twice a year to remind each other of their own importance. Champagne that cost more than her monthly rent, flower arrangements taller than she was. Women in gowns that probably had their own names. Valentina had done this kind of work for 3 years, slipping in and out of these worlds, pouring drinks for men who looked through her like she was made of glass. She was good at it precisely because she understood the fundamental rule. You are furniture. You are invisible. You do not exist unless summoned. She'd needed to use the bathroom. The ones for staff were all the way down in the East Wing, and she'd made a wrong turn somewhere past the 3rd corridor. The Sorrento estate was architectural madness. 17 rooms on the main floor alone, hallways that bent at strange angles, doors that looked identical to one another. She'd opened what she thought was a powder room. It was not a powder room. It was a study. Dark paneled walls, bookshelves from floor to ceiling, a fire crackling low in a stone hearth, a desk the size of a small country. And behind that desk, 3 men in sharp suits who stopped talking the moment she stepped through the door. The 2 men standing, broad, stone-faced, with the kind of stillness that spoke of professional violence, looked at each other and then at the man seated behind the desk. That was the man who looked at her. That was Nikolai. She didn't know his name yet. She only knew his eyes. They were pale, a gray-green that the firelight turned almost silver, and they held a quality she had never encountered before in any human gaze. Not malice, not lust, not annoyance at the interruption. Just an absolute, glacial certainty. The certainty of a man who has never once in his adult life been surprised by anything, and who has decided, in the span of half a second, exactly what to do about her. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice coming out smaller than she'd intended. "Wrong door. I'm so sorry." She started to step back. "Close the door," he said. The voice matched the eyes. Quiet, unhurried. Russian accent, barely there. Like something polished smooth over years. Like a stone in a river. You're not going anywhere." He lifted his bourbon to his mouth and took a slow sip without breaking eye contact. "Come in. Close the door behind you." The survival instinct Valentina possessed was screaming. The 2 men flanking him hadn't moved, but their attention had sharpened into something almost physical. She was caught in a triangle of focus, and she understood, with the clarity that only genuine fear can provide, that the correct move here was not resistance. She stepped inside. She closed the door. The room smelled of cedar and something darker, expensive tobacco, old books, the faint mineral bite of cold stone. The fire popped softly. Outside, muffled by thick walls, she could still hear the distant noise of the gala, laughter, crystal, The ghost of the string quartet. Another world. What did you hear? His voice was even, clinical. Nothing, she said. I just walked in. I was looking for the bathroom. I took a wrong turn. I wasn't listening at the door. I didn't hear anything. Was it true? She replayed the last 10 seconds in her mind. She'd pushed open the door. She'd seen them. She'd caught perhaps 3 words in a language that wasn't English. Russian, she thought, before the conversation died. Nothing intelligible, nothing meaningful. But she understood with a cold certainty that had nothing to do with what she'd heard, and everything to do with the way these 3 men looked at her, that what she'd heard was irrelevant. What mattered was that she'd seen. She'd seen their faces. She'd seen the photographs spread across the desk, the ones the man on the right was already turning face down, with quiet efficiency. She'd seen whatever was happening in this room that was not supposed to be seen by anyone who worked in a white shirt and black trousers. Your name, he said. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Valentina Cruz. He repeated it. Valentina. Not a question, just the word, turned over in his mouth, examined. How long have you been working tonight? Since 6. I'm with the catering staff, Bergamo Events. She kept her voice steady, through an act of pure will. I have ID, I know who you are. He set down his glass, stood. He was taller than she'd registered from the doorway, 6'2", maybe more, with the kind of build that suggested not a gym, but a history. Shoulders that had carried things, hands that had done things. His suit was black, perfectly cut, no tie. The top button of his shirt was open. He wore a watch that probably cost more than her apartment building. He walked around the desk slowly, without urgency, as though he had already decided the outcome of this interaction, and was simply moving through the steps. Valentina's hands were very still at her sides. She was not going to let them shake. He stopped about 4 feet from her, close enough for her to see the scar that ran through his left eyebrow, thin and white and old, close enough for her to catch his scent. Cedar, something clean and cold, the faint ghost of tobacco. He studied her face for a long moment. You're frightened, he observed. You'd be frightened too, she said, if you accidentally walked into someone else's room and got detained. Something moved behind his eyes, the faintest shift. He tilted his head, just barely, as though she'd said something unexpected. Detained, he repeated. Is that what this is? Isn't it? The silence stretched. Behind him, the 2 other men were watching with the focused patience of people who did this kind of thing routinely and were waiting to be told what came next. Victor, Nikolai said, without looking away from her. Find out everything. The man on the right, Victor apparently, nodded once and left the room. Gregor, the other man straightened. Get the car. Gregor also left. She was alone with him. The fear got sharper and stranger, because along with it came something she hadn't expected and absolutely did not want. A profound animal awareness of him, of how still he was, of the intelligence in those pale eyes, of the way he watched her with an attention that was total and unnerving, and somehow, insanely, felt like the most seen she'd been in years. She pushed that thought down immediately. Where's the car going? She asked. Somewhere quieter. He turned and walked back to his desk, unhurried, as though the matter were already settled. We need to have a conversation, you and I prefer not to do it surrounded by 200 people who are already wondering where I've gone. I'm not getting in a car with you. He sat down, picked up his bourbon again, looked at her over the rim of the glass with an expression that was almost gentle. Valentina, he said, I am going to give you a choice. You can get in the car voluntarily, and we will have a conversation, and at the end of it, assuming I believe what you tell me, you will go home. He paused. You can make this difficult, and I will still make sure you get in the car, but I will be considerably less patient about the conversation afterward. She stared at him. That's not a choice, she said. That's a threat with extra steps. That thing moved behind his eyes again, stronger this time. She could not read it. Couldn't tell if it was irritation or amusement or something else entirely. Get your coat, he said. The car was a black Mercedes, bulletproof from the feel of the doors. Victor drove. She sat in the back beside Nikolai, maintaining the maximum possible distance between them, which wasn't much, given the length of a car. The city moved past outside, Milan at midnight, all amber streetlights and wet cobblestones. She'd been working in Milan for 6 months, had come from Barcelona on a short-term contract, and had planned to go back in 3 weeks. She focused on that. 3 weeks. She had a flight booked. She had a small apartment in Barceloneta that smelled like the sea, and had a cat named Jorge, who belonged to her neighbor, but had adopted her kitchen. She had a life. She was going to get back to it. Tell me about yourself, Nikolai said. He'd taken out his phone, and was scrolling through something, not ignoring her, but not performing interest either. Multitasking. She had the unpleasant sense that he already had whatever Victor had found. I'm a catering worker, I already told you. You have a degree. He glanced up. Art history. University of Barcelona. Honors. You worked for 3 years at Galleria Espai in the Gothic Quarter before the gallery closed. You've been doing event work since. A pause. That seems like a significant step down. She said nothing. You're 28. No criminal record. No remarkable associations. No connection to anyone in this city of significance. He put the phone away. Which means you walked into that room by genuine accident. That's what I told you. I know. He looked out the window. I tend to verify things rather than take them on faith. Smart policy, she said flatly, for a man who has rooms he doesn't want people walking into. The silence this time was different. Charged. When he looked at her again, there was something new in his face. Not threat. Something more complicated. You have a very particular way of speaking to me, he said. Is that a problem? I haven't decided. He studied her for another moment. Most people in your situation are considerably more careful. Most people in my situation aren't accidentally wandering caterers who don't actually know anything. She held his gaze steadily, though her heart was doing something irregular and unpleasant. I walked into the wrong room. I saw 3 men having a conversation. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you do. I don't want to know. I want to go home. You said you don't know who I am. I don't. He seemed to consider this. My name is Nikolai Sorokin. It meant nothing to her. She shook her head slightly. He watched her closely. Reading her, she realized. Looking for the lie, and finding, apparently, that there wasn't one. Something shifted in his posture. Infinitesimal. A tiny relaxation of something that had been taught. You're telling the truth, he said. It wasn't quite surprised, more like confirmed. I generally do, she said. That, he said, is either an admirable quality or a catastrophically dangerous one, depending on your situation. The car slowed. She looked out and saw that they'd arrived somewhere. A building, clean-lined and modern. All dark glass. Not a prison, not a warehouse. Some kind of private residence or office. Where are we? She asked. My apartment. He opened the door before the car had fully stopped, moving with an easy sureness. We'll finish the conversation inside. I already told you everything. Come. He was already on the pavement, holding the door open, not touching her, not threatening, just waiting with that absolute patience that was somehow more frightening than aggression. I'll have someone take you home afterward. She got out of the car. She told herself it was pragmatism. She told herself she was choosing the path of least resistance. She told herself a lot of things, standing on that wet pavement, looking up at his building, while the city hummed around her. She didn't examine the other thing. The inexplicable, infuriating thing that had started in the back of the car when he looked at her. Not with threat, not with hunger, but with attention. Pure, complete, undivided attention, as though she were the only thing in the room worth looking at. Chapter 2. The Apartment. The apartment was on the top 2 floors of the building, and occupied the kind of space that only exists in the intersection of extreme wealth and extreme taste. It wasn't ostentatious. There was no gold, No marble pillars, no art chosen specifically to intimidate. It was restrained. Clean lines, dark tones, materials that felt expensive because they were expensive, not because they were trying to look it. Books everywhere. That surprised her. Real books, used books, spines cracked and pages marked, shelves covering entire walls. A collection that hadn't been assembled by a decorator. There was a piano in the corner of the main room, a Bosendorfer, black, its surface carrying the faint ghost of use. He played. She filed that away without quite meaning to. "Sit," he said, nodding toward a sitting area, long charcoal sofa, low table, the city spreading out beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. She sat. He didn't. He poured 2 glasses of something amber from a decanter on a side table, set one in front of her without asking, and stood with his back to her for a moment, looking out at the city. She looked at the glass and did not touch it. "I'm not going to poison you," he said, without turning around. "I don't know that." "True." He turned, looked at the untouched glass. Something crossed his face that might, from a very great distance, have been humor. "The glass is already open. Any poison administered to you tonight would be a waste of good whiskey." She picked up the glass, didn't drink, just held it. He came and sat across from her, angling himself in the chair with the loose ease of a man who was entirely comfortable in his own space. He drank, watched her. "Valentina Cruz," he said again. That particular way he had of saying her name, not casual, not formal, as though he were claiming something. "Nikolai Sorokin," she replied, with the same weight. The corner of his mouth moved. "You learn fast." "I've been in the room for 40 minutes. I'm a quick study." "What do you see," he said slowly, "when you look at me?" The question was unexpected enough that she answered honestly, before she could think to be strategic. "A man who is used to being obeyed," she said, "who hasn't been told no in a very long time, who is intelligent enough to know that intelligence doesn't make you right." "Who is?" She stopped. "Continue." "Who is lonely," she said, and immediately wondered what the hell was wrong with her. He went very still. Not the controlled stillness from before. Something more genuine, like a bell that had been struck and was vibrating below the threshold of sound. "That," he said, after a long moment, "is not what most people say." "What do most people say?" "Dangerous, powerful, ruthless." A pause. "Cold." "You're all of those things too," she said, "but so are a lot of people who aren't lonely. Those things aren't mutually exclusive." He looked at her for a long time. She had the sense of something happening behind those pale eyes, some recalibration, some interior assessment of the situation that she wasn't privy to. "I want to ask you something," he said. "You've been asking me things for an hour. Different kind of question." He set down his glass, leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, hands loosely clasped. In that position he looked younger, or rather the weight he carried seemed to shift slightly, to redistribute, as though he were, for a moment, setting it down. "Why aren't you more afraid of me?" She considered this honestly. She was afraid of him. On some level, she was very afraid. "But because I think you've already decided not to hurt me," she said. "If you were going to, you'd have done it already. Or you would have left me at the estate and had someone else deal with it. You brought me here yourself. You're talking to me yourself." She paused. "People who intend harm don't usually offer whiskey and have this many books." Something that might have been a smile, genuine, fractional, quickly gone. "The books argue against dangerous intent," he said. "That's novel reasoning." "A man with this many books has too much interior life to be purely brutal," she said. "Brutality requires a certain lack of imagination." He looked at the shelves, then back at her. "Art history," he said. "What?" "Your degree. You spent years looking at how humans express what they can't say directly, looking at what objects tell you about the people who made them." He paused. "You're doing that now, reading me like an artifact." The observation was so precisely correct that she felt a strange, disorienting vertigo. The sensation of being accurately perceived by someone you don't want having that much access to you. "Is that a problem?" she asked. "No," he said, and the word had a quality she couldn't quite name. Not quite relief. Not quite hunger. Something in between. It's been a long time since anyone looked at me like I was something worth understanding. The fire was still going. He had one here too, at a stone hearth. The city glittered beyond the glass. They were alone and very quiet, and she was still holding the whiskey glass she hadn't drunk from, and something in the room had shifted from interrogation to something she did not have a word for. "What happens now?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood. Decision made. Whatever internal debate had been occurring, resolved. "Now," he said, "I have Victor drive you home." "That's it?" "That's it." He moved to the side table, picked up his phone. "You walked into the wrong room. You know nothing. You have no connection to anything that matters." He glanced up. "Go home, Valentina Cruz. Live your life. Forget you ever saw me." She stood, set the untouched whiskey down. She should have felt relief. She did feel relief, or something adjacent to it, something in the right neighborhood. But alongside it was something else, something irritating and irrational, which was the sense of being dismissed. "You're not going to tell me what you do," she said. "No. Or who those other men were, or what was in those photographs. No. Or why a man who lives in an apartment like this with this many books, and what is absolutely a Bosendorfer grand piano, is sitting in a private meeting at a charity gala at midnight." He looked at her steadily. "No." She nodded, moved toward the door. Victor would be somewhere. She'd seen another man in the hall when they'd come in. She'd find him. "Valentina." She stopped, turned. He was still standing by the side table, phone in hand, watching her. And in the light from the city through the glass, with the fire behind him, he looked for just that one unguarded moment, like the loneliest thing she'd ever seen. "The gallery that closed," he said. "Galleria Espai." She waited. "There's a gallery here. The Ferretti. Private collection. Not open to the public. Their curator position has been vacant for 6 months. A pause. "You would be qualified." She stared at him. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm noting a fact." His face was neutral again, closed. "What you do with facts is your own business." She held his gaze for another moment. "Forget I saw you," she said quietly, "but remember that you offered me something." A pause. "That's a strange thing to do with a loose end." She left. She did not look back. But she felt his eyes on her the entire way to the elevator, through the lobby, out into the cold Milan air, all the way home. Chapter 3. What she should have done. She should have taken the flight back to Barcelona. It was already booked. The apartment in Barceloneta was waiting. Jorge, the borrowed cat, was presumably waiting, and her life, small and safe and entirely her own, was waiting. She had no ties to Milan, no reason to stay, no sense of obligation. She should have gotten on the plane. Instead, she looked up the Ferretti Gallery. She did it on her phone, 3 days after the Sorrento estate, in the kitchen of her temporary apartment, while drinking bad coffee. She told herself it was curiosity, told herself she was just looking. The Ferretti was a private foundation dedicated to Italian and Eastern European modern art. Exactly the intersection of her training and her actual interest. The place where the Baroque and the contemporary rubbed up against each other in ways that were philosophically interesting and aesthetically exhilarating. The curator position was real, posted publicly on the foundation's website. Curator of European Acquisitions, requiring fluency in Italian and Spanish. She had both. Expertise in 20th century Central European art movements. She had that too. It had been her thesis. And the ability to work with private collectors across multiple jurisdictions. She stared at the listing for a very long time. She reminded herself who had pointed her toward it. She applied anyway. The interview was 4 days later, conducted by a woman named Dr. Elena Ferretti, 70, impeccably dressed, with the focused intelligence of someone who had spent a lifetime in rooms full of extraordinary things and was very hard to impress. She asked precise technical questions about acquisitions and provenance and the ethics of private collecting versus public access. She asked about Valentina's thesis, followed up with 3 counterarguments that had not appeared in the published literature, and waited to see how Valentina handled being intellectually challenged. Valentina handled it the way she handled most things she cared about. Directly, without apology, with the specific pleasure that comes from talking about something you genuinely love. She got the job. She did not see Nikolai Sorokin. For 6 weeks, she did not see Nikolai Sorokin, and she began to wonder if she'd constructed the entire episode from stress and darkness, and the particular kind of heightened experience that comes from genuine fear. She settled into the gallery. The Ferretti was extraordinary, a private collection housed in a converted palazzo in the Bra district, and her work was interesting and real and demanding in exactly the right ways. She moved from the temporary apartment to a proper one, took her furniture out of storage, started cooking again. She had, apparently, done what he asked. She had lived her life. And then, on a Thursday evening in late November, she came around a corner in the Ferretti's restoration wing, and walked directly into his chest. He caught her by the shoulders before she could fall. His hands were warm through her jacket, and he held her for 1 second, just one, before stepping back and releasing her. Valentina. Her name in his mouth again. That weight, that deliberateness. You. She looked at him. He was in a dark gray suit today, no tie again, and he looked exactly the way she'd remembered him, and more so. More present, more sharp, the kind of person who takes up space even in large rooms. You're a patron of this gallery. Foundation board member, he said. Since 2019. He paused. I didn't know you'd taken the position when I mentioned it. I learned after. Is that true? Would you believe me if I said yes? I don't know. Then I'll tell you the truth and let you do what you want with it. His hands were in his pockets now, and he was watching her with that same focused attention. I was surprised, and then I was... He stopped. A barely perceptible pause. Not displeased. Something turned over in her chest. She ignored it. You sit on the board of this foundation, she said. That means you're part of my professional world now. It appears so. That's complicated, he said quietly. Yes. They stood in the restoration wing of an extraordinary gallery, surrounded by canvases that were worth more than small countries, and the distance between them was exactly 2 meters. And the silence was the loudest thing Valentina had experienced in years. I need to get back to work, she said. Of course. He stepped aside. She walked past him. She could feel the warmth of his attention on the back of her neck, like a brand. Valentina. She stopped, did not turn. There's a board dinner on the 14th. You'll be there, as the new curator. A pause. I look forward to continuing the conversation. She started walking again. She did not say anything else. But something in her chest, some stubborn, irrational, absolutely unwelcome thing, was warmer than it had been in a very long time. Chapter 4. The Dinner. The board dinner was at a private restaurant, closed for the evening. 12 people, including Valentina, who was the newest member of the Ferretti's professional staff, and therefore technically not on the board at all, but invited as a courtesy. She sat at the end of the table, which was fine with her. She knew 3 people, had met 4 others briefly, and spent the first half of dinner in excellent conversation with a Dutch collector named Jan Hoeven, who had opinions about Willem de Kooning that she found genuinely fascinating. She did not look at Nikolai Sorokin, who was seated at the other end of the table, for the first 40 minutes. Then he looked at her. She felt it before she saw it, the prickling awareness of being watched, a shift in the frequency of the room. She looked up. He was watching her with that quality of absolute attention, this time with something added. Something that she would have called warmth, if she hadn't been so certain that was the wrong word for him. He was in the middle of a conversation with the person to his right, but his eyes had found her across the table, and the candlelight between them, and 11 other people, and he wasn't pretending otherwise. She looked back at her wine. Her heart was doing that thing again, the irregular, unwelcome thing. After dinner, the group moved to the restaurant's private salon for coffee. and the conversations dissolved and reformed in the way they do at these events. People peeling off into smaller clusters. The careful social geography of people who are important to each other in multiple ways. Valentina had been talking to Elena Ferretti about an acquisition she was considering, a mid-century Hungarian landscape painter whose work she thought was drastically undervalued, when she felt him approach before she saw him. Dr. Ferretti. He kissed Elena on both cheeks, the Italian greeting natural and easy. Nikolai. Elena's eyes moved between them with the sharp perceptiveness of a woman who had been reading people for 7 decades. You've met our new curator. How are you finding the collection? His voice, in this setting, was different. Or rather, her experience of it was different. It was still low and unhurried, still carried that faint Russian cadence, but here it was wrapped in the social rituals of the room, and that made it simultaneously more normal and more intimate. He was performing the conventional dance, while his eyes told her something else. The collection is extraordinary, she said, keeping her voice professional, her expression neutral. The 17th-century Flemish works in the East Corridor are some of the finest I've seen outside the major nationals. And there are 3 pieces in the storage that should absolutely be on display. They're exceptional, and they're sitting in the dark. I'd like to hear your analysis. He held her gaze. If you're willing to walk me through it. That's my job. Then, Thursday? I'm in Milan through the end of the month. Elena Ferretti was watching this exchange with an expression of carefully managed non-reaction that nonetheless communicated everything. Thursday, Valentina said. My office is on the 2nd floor, 3 o'clock. I'll be there. He moved on, smoothly, naturally, back into another conversation, and Valentina turned back to Elena and felt Elena's gaze on her like a warm, knowing light. He's been on the board for 7 years, Elena said, her voice quiet and conversational. He's never asked to look at storage. Perhaps no one ever told him what was in there, Valentina said evenly. Perhaps not. A pause. He's a complicated man, our Nikolai. Most interesting people are, Elena smiled. Indeed they are, my dear. Thursday came. He was on time. She'd half expected him to be late, to wield lateness as a small power play, but he arrived at her office door at exactly 3 o'clock and knocked rather than walking in. That surprised her. Come in, she said. Her office was small, by the gallery's standards. She hadn't been there long enough to have properly made it her own yet. But there were the beginnings. A print she liked, tacked to one wall. Books, stacked in progress on the corner of the desk. A small succulent on the windowsill that she suspected was doomed, given her history with plants. He looked at all of it with that attention of his. Nice office, he said. Small. I'm working on it. She grabbed her notebook. The storage is downstairs. I'll take you through the 3 pieces I mentioned, and you can tell me what you think, though your opinion on acquisition is ultimately Elena's territory. I'm not here to talk about the art, he said. She stopped, turned. He was standing just inside the door, hands in his pockets, watching her. The afternoon light from the window was behind her, which meant she could see his face clearly, and he was looking at her with something unguarded in it. Something that hadn't been there before, or that she hadn't been able to see before, or that he was, perhaps, choosing for the first time to let her see. Nikolai, she said carefully. I've thought about you every day for 6 weeks, he said. The room got very quiet. I don't know what to do about that, he continued, his voice still even, still controlled, but underneath the control was something that was decidedly not controlled. I'm not a man who is accustomed to not knowing what to do. I find it, a pause, profoundly inconvenient. She stared at him. You're telling me this because you said you'd tell the truth, he said, and it seemed like it should go both ways. The succulent on the windowsill was very small and probably going to die. The city moved outside in the ordinary afternoon way. She was standing in her office holding a notebook, and Nikolai Sorokin was telling her he'd been thinking about her for 6 weeks, and her heart was no longer doing something irregular. It had moved past irregular and into something she didn't have clinical language for. We shouldn't, she said. I know, he said. You're on the foundation board. I work here. You're whatever you are. Whatever that room in the Sorrento estate was about, and I'm a woman who reads men like artifacts," he said quietly, "and who told me after 40 minutes that I was lonely." He paused. "No one has ever said that to me. I shouldn't have. It was the truest thing anyone has said to me in years." She looked at him. Really looked at him, the way she'd been avoiding doing since that night in the car, since the way he'd watched her across a dinner table, since all of it. She looked at the scar through his eyebrow, and the pale eyes, and the particular quality of stillness that was, she understood now, not coldness, but restraint. A massive, permanent restraint, like a dam holding back something enormous. "I don't know who you are," she said. "I mean, I know your name. I know you sit on charity boards, and have more books than most people, and play the piano, and own a very nice apartment. I don't know what you are." "No," he said, "you don't. Is that going to be a problem?" A long silence. "Probably," he said. Chapter 5. What he was. She found out incrementally. Not because he told her. He did tell her, but slowly, in pieces, and never the whole picture at once. She found out, partly through what he said, partly through what he didn't say, partly through the process of assembling evidence the way she'd been trained to. Looking at the gaps, the absences, the things that didn't add up. He was Russian, born in St. Petersburg, moved to Italy at 22. He had family in both countries. His accent was slight, because he'd spent his adult life deliberately removing it. He spoke 5 languages, Russian, Italian, English, French, and a limited German that he described as sufficient for insults and wine orders. He ran what was officially a private equity firm with interests in real estate, hospitality, and several manufacturing concerns across Central and Eastern Europe. The firm was real. The business was real. The numbers, as far as she could determine, were real. The other thing was also real. The Sorokin name carried weight in specific rooms, specific cities, in ways that private equity didn't fully explain. She heard it first from Jan Hooven, the Dutch collector from the dinner, who mentioned in passing that Sorokin was one of those men you want to have on your side and very much don't want against you, with a tone that suggested this was both specific and personal. She heard it again from an Italian gallery owner she'd met through the Ferretti, who went slightly pale when she mentioned she'd been speaking with Nikolai at a board meeting, and who recovered quickly and said nothing illuminating, but whose silence said everything. She was not naive. She understood what the categories were. She'd grown up in Barcelona, in a neighborhood where certain men had certain kinds of power, and everyone understood, without it being spoken, what kind. What she was less clear on was what it meant for her, for whatever this was, because this was something. It had started with Thursday's conversation in her office. He'd left after 10 minutes, after saying what he'd come to say, without pressing, without maneuvering for more. He'd said his piece, and left her to decide what to do with it. 2 days later he'd texted. She hadn't known he had her number, and hadn't asked how he got it, asking if she wanted to see a private show at a smaller gallery in Navigli. She'd gone. They'd walked through the show without speaking much, both of them with the natural fluency in art that comes from actually caring about it. And at the end, he'd taken her for dinner at a restaurant where the owner greeted him like family, and they'd talked for 3 hours about everything. Her thesis, his time in Petersburg, the particular philosophical tension between preserving art and making it accessible, a novel they'd both read, his opinion of Milan versus Rome versus every other city, the hierarchy, delivered with the specificity of someone who had lived in all of them, was amusing and precise. He hadn't touched her. Not that night, not the 3 times they'd seen each other in the following 2 weeks. He was careful in a way that she found both respectful and slightly maddening, maintaining a distance that communicated awareness of her autonomy, which she appreciated, while also making her very aware of how much she wanted him to close it. Then came the night everything changed. It was a Tuesday, and she'd been at the gallery until 8, which was later than usual because she'd been absorbed in the provenance research on a piece Elena was considering. A small oil-on panel, possibly Czechoslovakian, 1930s, and the paper trail was fascinating and incomplete in interesting ways. She'd come out into the bright evening, cold and damp and smelling of November stone, and found him leaning against the wall opposite the gallery entrance, smoking, looking at the sky. "You smoke," she said, surprised. "Occasionally." He dropped the cigarette and turned. In the streetlight his face had a quality she hadn't seen before, something that suggested the evening had been long and difficult, in ways that had nothing to do with her. "Are you all right?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said, "not particularly." She should have asked what had happened. She should have kept the appropriate distance. She should have said something sensible about seeing him Thursday or texting him later. "Come home with me," she said. "I'll make dinner." He blinked, fractionally, barely perceptible, but she caught it. She had the sense that people did not often offer him dinner, that the invitations he received were of a different kind. "I'm not sorry. I'm not good company tonight." "I'm not asking for company," she said. "I'm asking you to come and eat something, and be somewhere that isn't wherever you've been all day." Another pause. "Valentina. Nikolai." He pushed off the wall. "Lead the way." Her apartment was 15 minutes by foot. She walked everywhere in the Brera when she could. It was one of her favorite things about living there. He walked beside her, close without touching, and they didn't talk much. The city did what cities do, absorbed them, moved around them, gave them the gift of urban anonymity even in its intimacy. The apartment was the truest version of her. Books stacked horizontally on top of vertical books because there was never quite enough shelf space. Prints and photographs tacked at the particular angles her eye found right. A kitchen that was small and warm and organized with the logic of someone who cooked regularly and seriously. She set water to boil and opened wine without asking what he wanted, because she'd noticed he drank what was put in front of him without fussing. He sat at her kitchen table, not on a sofa, not maintaining formal distance, but at the table, where the light was warm and close, and he watched her cook. "What happened today?" she asked, her back to him, handling the pasta. A long silence. "Someone died," he said. She stilled for a moment. "I'm sorry. It was a business matter, not personal." Another silence. "That's not entirely true. Nothing is ever entirely not personal." She didn't push. She let him have the silence while she cooked, and the apartment was warm and smelled of garlic and wine, and outside the November city moved in its ordinary way. She put the food in front of him, sat across from them. He looked at the plate, and something crossed his face, something private, quickly hidden. "Thank you," he said. "Tell me about him," she said. "The person who died, if you want to." He looked at her. "His name was Petrov," he said. "He'd worked for me for 12 years. He was good at his job, and he was, in the ways that matter, a decent man. What he was good at his job at was not—" He stopped again, found the words. "Not the kind of work that gets eulogized publicly." "No," she said quietly. "He had a daughter. She's 9. He looked at the wine glass. "I'll make sure she's taken care of. That's within what I can do. But she's going to grow up without her father, and the reason for that is tangled up in what I am and what I do, even though he made his own choices." A pause. "I've been thinking about that, about the weight of adjacency." "The weight of adjacency," she said softly. "The people around you, the cost of being close to something." His eyes came up to hers. "I think about it in relation to you, more than I'd like to." The kitchen was very quiet. "I'm not 9 years old," she said, "and I know what you are, or I know enough of it. You know very little of it, Valentina. Enough to have a general impression, not enough to understand the specific." He stopped, seemed to weigh something. "The specific requirements of my life, the things that come with it." She held his gaze. "Are you trying to push me away?" "I'm trying to tell you the truth. Those aren't mutually exclusive either." He set down his fork, looked at her across the table, across the ordinary domesticity of the meal, with an expression of such concentrated, barely contained feeling that her breath caught. "I don't know what to do about you," he said again, the same words from her office, but different now, less controlled, something rawer underneath. "What do you want to do about me?" she asked. A very long silence, the wine between them, the warm kitchen light. "Everything," he said, quietly. The word fell into the room and stayed there. She stood up slowly, collected both their plates, carried them to the sink. She stood at the sink for a moment, with her back to him, both hands on the cool edge of the counter. She was thinking about what she wanted. What she actually wanted, separate from what was smart, separate from what was safe. She turned around. He was already watching her. He turned in his chair to face her direction, and his forearms were on the table, and his eyes were on her face, and there was nothing concealed in them now, nothing managed, nothing held back. Just Nikolai, stripped of the careful distance, looking at her with everything he felt, written plainly in those pale eyes. She crossed the kitchen. She stood in front of him. He didn't move, didn't reach for her, waited, the way he always waited, giving her the space to choose, to lead, to decide. She lowered herself slowly until she was seated on the edge of the kitchen table, directly in front of him, close enough that their knees almost touched. She looked down at him, and he looked up at her, and the distance between them was, finally, just air. She reached out and put her hand on his jaw. His eyes closed for just a moment. Involuntary, he couldn't help it, and the involuntariness of it told her more about his hunger than any deliberate gesture could have. He turned slightly into her hand, just slightly, like something that has been cold for a very long time, moving toward warmth, without quite meaning to. When he opened his eyes, again they were darker. "Valentina," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Shh," she said softly. "Stop thinking." She leaned down and kissed him. He kissed her back with the same quality as everything else about him, complete, controlled, present. But underneath the control was the thing she'd sensed from the beginning, the massive restrained thing. And when her mouth opened under his, she felt it shift. His hands came up slowly, as though he were being careful, as though he were worried about what he'd do if he let himself not be careful. One at her waist, one at the back of her head, threading through her hair with a gentleness that was at complete odds with everything imposing and dangerous about him. He kissed her as though she was something to be learned, as though there were no urgency, as though he wanted to know every particular of her mouth, and this was only the beginning of a very long study. She was the one who made it urgent. She was the one who pulled him closer, who let the small sound of wanting escape her, who slid off the table and onto his lap, and felt his grip tighten in immediate response. A sharp, involuntary tightening that told her exactly what she'd suspected, that the control was a choice, that underneath it was something that had been waiting a long time. "Valentina," his voice against her mouth. "Don't stop," she said. A sound from him, low, barely there, something between a word and not. We should," he was pulling back slightly, just enough to see her face. His expression, strained, not with reluctance but with effort. The effort of a man who had reasons to be careful and was finding those reasons increasingly irrelevant. "This isn't simple," she said. "I know. I don't care. You should care." "I know I should." She stayed where she was. She could feel his heartbeat, fast, which surprised her. Everything else about him said stillness, and now his heart was racing under her hand. "I do care, and I'm still here." He looked at her for a long time, her face between his hands, studying her with that total attention. "I don't do things halfway," he said. "You should know that. Whatever this is, I won't do it halfway." "Neither will I," she said. Something settled in his face, a decision made, not reluctantly, but with the specific gravity of a man who makes decisions carefully and means them completely. He kissed her again, and this time there was nothing held back. Chapter 6. Afterward. Morning came slowly. She was aware of him before she was fully awake. The particular quality of another person's warmth in a bed, the weight of a hand resting against the small of her back. She lay still for a moment, eyes closed, taking stock of herself in the way she always did at the start of something new. What did I do? Do I regret it? What is true about this? What was true? She didn't regret it. What was also true, she was, for the first time in a very long time, frightened in a way that had nothing to do with physical danger, and everything to do with feeling. She turned over. He was awake. He'd been awake, she suspected, for a while. There was none of the heaviness of recent sleep in him, no disorientation. He was lying on his back, looking at the ceiling, with an expression she couldn't categorize. And when she moved, he turned his head and looked at her. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." His voice was rough in a way that was very different from his usual precision. He turned onto his side to face her, and the morning light from her curtains fell across him, and he looked, not older, but more human, more himself, as though sleep or proximity or both had dissolved the last of the armor. "You were thinking very hard," she said. "I usually am." "What about, this time?" A pause. "About how to do this correctly," he said. She considered this, as opposed to badly. He reached out and tucked a piece of hair back from her face, very gently, the gesture so careful it made something ache in her chest. "I have a history of doing things I care about badly. Through excess, through pressure, through not knowing how to be." He seemed to search for the word. "Tender. Tender," she said softly. "It's not a quality that's been particularly useful in my life." She looked at him, at the scar through his eyebrow, at the age in his face that wasn't quite age, but something more like cost, the cost of everything he'd carried and done and chosen. "You've been tender this morning," she said. "You were tender last night. You make it—" Another pause. He seemed genuinely uncertain how to finish the sentence, and his uncertainty, his of all people, made her heart do the thing again. "Easier. You make it easier than I've ever found it." "Good," she said. "Let's keep it that way." He studied her face for a long moment. "I need to tell you some things," he said. "About what I am, what my life is. I told you last night that you didn't know enough, and I meant it. Before this goes further, before I let it, you need to understand what you're choosing," she said. "Yes." "Then tell me." He told her. Not everything. She understood there was a layer she wasn't being given access to yet, a core of operational specifics that he was not going to share. But the shape of it, the architecture. The Sorokin family had been, for 2 generations, part of what was known in certain circles as the Bratva, the organized network of Russian criminal organizations that had, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, spread their influence across Europe, and in the case of certain families, embedded themselves in legitimate business in ways that made the lines between legal and illegal more theoretical than practical. His father had been a central figure. His uncle still was. Nikolai himself was transitioning, the word he used, with a precision that suggested he'd thought about it a great deal. He had spent 12 years deliberately building the legitimate side of the enterprise, deliberately reducing his direct involvement in the other side, deliberately creating a structure that would eventually allow him to step fully clear of it. He wasn't there yet. He wouldn't be there for some time. "How much time?" she asked. "Years." He said it without hedging. "More than 2, less than 10. It depends on variables I can't fully control." "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, I am a man who does things that are not legal in some jurisdictions, that require alliances with people who do worse things than I do, and that result, occasionally, in outcomes like Petrov." She sat with this for a long moment. "Do you want out?" she asked. Genuinely, truly. "Yes," he said. And the simplicity of it, the lack of performance, told her it was true. "Why?" she asked. He looked at her directly. "Because I am 41 years old, and I have spent 20 of those years building walls, and I am very tired of walls." She thought about the apartment, the books, the Bosendorfer. She thought about lonely. "All right," she said. "All right? I understand what you are. I understand that this is complicated, and that the complications are serious, and that I'm taking on risk I can't fully measure." She met his eyes. "I'm choosing this anyway." His expression did something she hadn't seen before, something that stripped away the last of the careful management, the practiced composure. He looked for one unguarded moment, as though he'd been handed something he'd stopped believing he could have. "Valentina," he said, and her name in his mouth was different now. Lower, rougher, full of something he wasn't entirely finding words for. "Stop overthinking it," she said. "You can't tell me to stop overthinking things." "I can. You're going to listen. Fully. This time, an actual smile, not the fractional almost smiles she'd catalogued in the previous weeks. It transformed his face, made him look briefly like someone who had never carried anything at all. She kissed that smile, pressed her mouth against it, soft and certain, and he held her like she was the most irreplaceable thing he'd ever had. Chapter 7. The Weight of Knowing. The next month was the best of her adult life. She was aware of that as it was happening, aware with the specific lucidity that comes from having lived enough loss to know good things while you have them, not just in retrospect. He was surprising. That was the word that kept arriving, in different forms. She knew she had built a picture of him in the weeks between the Sorrento estate and the morning she kissed him in her kitchen, and the picture had been accurate in its broad strokes. What she hadn't had room for was the particular texture of him, the specific, domestic, human details that complicated the outline. He cooked. Not elaborately, but seriously. Russian and Italian dishes learned at different points in his life, and he approached the kitchen with the same deliberate attention he brought to everything, which meant the food was always very good. He cooked for her 3 times in the first 2 weeks, each time in her kitchen, wearing an apron she'd found in a box of things she'd never unpacked. And the image of Nikolai Sorokin, one of the most feared men in the Eastern European criminal underworld, wearing her yellow apron and explaining the correct way to make borscht, was something she suspected would stay with her for the rest of her life. He read voraciously. She'd seen the books, but the practice of it, the way he moved through a novel, the speed, the density of annotation in margins, was something else. He read the way she looked at paintings, totally, analytically, extracting things other people missed. He'd read her thesis. She'd found this out when he referenced a specific passage in conversation, and she'd stared at him, and he'd said, with great composure, "It was available through the university library, the digital archive. I was curious," and the matter-of-factness of him having sought it out and read a 40,000-word academic document about her work because he was curious about her mind was so unexpectedly touching that she'd had to turn away to collect herself. He played the piano when he was at his apartment, and she was there. Not for her, not performing, just playing, the way some people think out loud. Late Scriabin mainly, and occasionally early Rachmaninoff, and sometimes things she didn't recognize that she suspected he'd written himself, though he'd only admitted to having tried when she asked. The playing was extraordinary. Not polished conservatory extraordinary, but true and personal, with the quality of someone saying things in music they couldn't say in words. She listened from the sofa, with her book and the firelight, and felt with increasing terror that she was in love with him. Not falling, already there. Had been, she suspected, since a kitchen table and a hand on his jaw, and the involuntary way his eyes had closed. The terror was specifically about the complications he'd named, the things he'd been honest about. The years, not 10, not 2, of still being what he was. Chosen with her eyes open, and she didn't regret the choice, but she was not naive enough to believe that open eyes made the road clear. The complications arrived on a Wednesday. She was at the gallery, in the middle of a detailed acquisition assessment. The Czechoslovakian painting, which had turned out to be genuinely extraordinary, and whose provenance she was now fairly certain went through an obscure wartime collection in Prague. When her office door opened, without a knock, and a man she didn't know walked in. He was roughly Nikolai's age, with Nikolai's coloring, Slavic features, pale eyes, the particular bearing of a man who carried authority as a physical trait. He was in an excellent suit, and he looked at her with an assessment that was not hostile, but was absolutely not warm. "Ms. Cruz," he said, his Russian accent considerably thicker than Nikolai's. "Sit down, please." She did not sit down. "Who are you?" she said. "My name is Andrei Sorokin." A pause, Nikolai's cousin. She looked at him carefully. He didn't mention you were coming. He doesn't know I'm here. Sat, without invitation, in the chair opposite her desk, occupying her space with a casual ease that was presumably intended to establish something. I wanted to speak to you independently. About what? About my cousin. He laced his fingers together. He speaks of you, which is unusual for Nikolai. He doesn't typically speak of personal matters. She waited. I want to understand what you want from him, Andrei said. She stared at him. I'm going to pretend, she said, keeping her voice very level, that you didn't just walk into my office uninvited and ask me what I want from your cousin, as though the answer might be his money or his connections, and ask you to clarify what you actually mean. Andrei studied her for a moment. Nikolai has had women before who, I'm sure he has, she said. I'm not one of them. I mean, she caught herself. I'm not here for whatever you're implying. I work here. I've known him for 2 months. She chose the word carefully, involved, and it's not your business. It is my business, Andrei said quietly, because he is my family, and he has been, in the past, careless about people who were not who they appeared to be. She softened slightly, despite herself, because there was something real in that, the genuine protectiveness of someone who had seen his cousin hurt by people who'd pretended to things they weren't. I understand, she said. And for what it's worth, I don't want anything from him. I want him. There's a difference. Andrei looked at her for a long moment. He told you what he is, he said. Not a question. The broad outline. And you're still here. I'm still here. Another long pause. He was reading her, the way Nikolai did, with that particular Sorokin quality of assessment. You're either very brave, he said finally, or very stupid. I've been told it's hard to tell which, she said. Something shifted in his face. The ghost of a smile, brief, reluctant, recognizable as a family trait. He is. Andrei stopped, started again. He is different, since you. I notice a difference. In a man I have known my entire life, I noticed something different. I wanted to understand why. She looked at him, at the genuine perplexity in his face, a man who cared about his cousin and was trying in his own blunt way to understand what had changed. Ask him, she said quietly. He'll tell you. He won't. He will, she said. If you ask him directly and you mean it, he will. A pause. He's honest when it matters. You know that. Andrei stood, smoothed his jacket. You know him, he said. It sounded surprised. I'm learning him, she said. It's ongoing. Andrei nodded once, moved to the door. Hand on the frame, he paused. He has enemies, he said. You should know that. Not abstractions, specific, patient people who would use someone close to him if they understood they could. He didn't look at her, just at the door frame. I'm telling you because he won't. He'll believe he can manage it without telling you, because that's what he does. He manages. A pause. But you should know. He left. She stood in her office for a long moment after he'd gone, looking at the door. Enemies, specific patient people. She thought about what she'd chosen, eyes open. Texted Nikolai. Your cousin came to see me. His reply came in 3 minutes. I know. I'm sorry. Are you all right? Fine. He was not unkind, actually. He was protecting you. He always has, since we were children. A pause. Then, what did he say? She looked at her phone, at the question, at what she was going to say next. He said you have enemies, that I should know. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, come over tonight. There are things I haven't told you. I should have. Come over and I'll tell you. She replied, I'll be there at 7. She put her phone down and looked at the painting she was assessing. The small Czech landscape, all grays and greens, a specific Eastern European light that was both beautiful and melancholy. A war had passed through the lives of the people who'd made it, and the people who'd owned it. The paper trail was full of gaps where history had torn through. She understood with a clarity that was almost peaceful, that she was in this, that she had been in this since a wrong door and a pale stare, and a voice that said, close the door, You're not going anywhere. She was in it. She was not going anywhere. Chapter 8. What he told her. The apartment was lit differently when she arrived. More lamps, warmer, as though he'd thought about how to receive her and had done something domestic about it. He met her at the door and kissed her before she'd fully taken off her coat, which was unusual for him. He was careful about spontaneity, deliberate about touch, not because he was cold, but because he was so precise about it that each gesture felt chosen. I was worried. She kissed him back and said without words, I know, I'm here. Stop worrying. They sat in the main room, the fire, the city-lit glass, the books. He poured wine. Did not pour for her until she nodded, some tiny ceremony of consideration that she'd come to know as characteristic. Andre shouldn't have come without telling me, he said. He was looking out for you, she said. You have people who look out for you. That's not nothing. He looked at the glass. I have people who need me to be a particular thing. That's different. He loves you, she said. That was obvious. He seemed to have no response to this. Tell me, she said. He told her. The enemies Andre had referenced had a name, Sava Marchetti, not a random name, she realized with a chill. Marchetti, as in the Marchetti Foundation, the gala, the first night, the room she'd walked into. Antonio Marchetti is legitimate, Nikolai said. The foundation is legitimate. His son Sava is a different matter. He runs the family's other interests. We have had a contested history, over territory, over agreements broken, over things that go back before I took full control of my family's position. How bad is the history? She asked carefully. Bad enough that he has made it known, through intermediaries, that people close to me are of interest to him. His voice was level, but there was something underneath it, something she'd learned to read as anger, a specific, controlled anger. He would not move against you directly. The consequences would be too severe, and he knows I would respond to anything like that with everything I have. A pause. But he watches. His people watch. If he understood what you mean to me, he would use it. To get to you. To pressure me. To create leverage. Valentina, I'm not leaving, she said. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to be careful. To tell me if anything feels wrong. If anyone approaches you. If you see anyone following you. If, Nikolai. She put her hand on his arm. I heard you. I'm not leaving. I'll be careful. She paused. But I need you to promise me something. Name it. No more deciding unilaterally what I can handle, what I should or shouldn't know. She held his eyes. I understand that you're used to managing your world alone. I understand that telling me things involves trust that has been hard for you to extend. She squeezed his arm. But I'm in this with you. If that's going to work, it has to go both ways. He looked at her hand on his arm, at her face. That is not a promise I have ever made before, he said. I know. I don't know if I'll keep it perfectly. I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking for the intention. A long silence. He turned his arm and took her hand, laced his fingers through hers with that particular care he had. You have it, he said. She looked at their hands, at the way they fit. I love you, she said. The words came out before she decided to say them, without calculation, without strategy. Just the truth, falling into the room the way true things did, simply, completely, with the weight of what they were. He went very still. When he looked at her, his expression was the most unguarded she had ever seen it, stripped of everything, down to the essential Nikolai. And what was there was so full and so vulnerable that she felt her own heart constrict. I have not. He stopped, started again. I have not been loved well, he said quietly. I have been wanted, needed, used, feared. But loved, in the way you mean it. Yes, she said, that way. I don't know how to receive it correctly. You're doing fine, she said. Valentina. He brought her hand to his mouth, held it there. His eyes closed. Ya tibia lublu, he said, against her knuckles, against her skin. I love you, since before I knew what to call it. The fire crackled, the city moved. She leaned into him, and he held her. And for a long time, neither of them said anything at all. And it was enough. Chapter 9. The Fracture. 2 months of that. 2 months of evenings and mornings, and the particular warmth of being deeply known by someone, of knowing them back. And then the world came in, the way the world always does, through the cracks in everything good. It started with a phone call he took at 3 a.m, the sound of his voice in the dark, pulling her half out of sleep. Not the words, which she couldn't make out, but the tone, flat and cold and very quiet. The voice he used when something was very wrong, and his response to it was the absolute stillness that came before action. He came back to bed after 20 minutes. She was awake, watching the ceiling. "Nikolai, go back to sleep," he said. "What happened?" A pause. "Something I need to deal with in the morning." "Tell me." He was quiet for a moment. "Sava Marchetti made a move," he said. "Not against you, against one of my operations in Prague. He's testing, seeing what I'll do." She sat up. "What will you do?" In the dark she could see the outline of him, still, composed, utterly controlled, but behind the stillness she felt the thing, the enormous contained thing, shifting and straining. "What I have to," he said. "Which means, nothing that touches you." He turned to face her. In the dark she could see only the pale gleam of his eyes. "I'm going to handle this. It will require things of me that I won't tell you the details of. I'm telling you now, because I promised you I would tell you when things were happening." She looked at him. "Are you safe?" she asked. "Yes. Is anyone going to get hurt?" The pause before he answered was answer enough. "Nikolai, I'm not going to lie to you." His voice was very quiet. "This is the part of what I am that I cannot clean up with good intentions. There are going to be consequences for what Marchetti did, and those consequences are going to be severe. And I cannot change that without losing things that I have spent years building. Structure, alliances, the specific architecture of who I am in that world that is currently keeping you safe." A pause. "I'm sorry. I don't know how else to tell you this. I thought I'd have more time before you had to see this part of it directly." She sat with this, with the weight of it. "What I said before," she said, "about choosing you with my eyes open." She paused. "I meant it. I'm not going to pretend I'm comfortable with whatever's going to happen, but I'm also not going to—" She stopped, searching for what she actually meant. "I'm not going to take the easy way out. I'm not going to suddenly decide I can't handle this just because it got real. Valentina." "I'm angry," she said, and the honesty of it surprised her even as she said it. "I'm angry that this is the world, that you're in it, and therefore I'm in proximity to it, and that people are going to get hurt, and there's nothing I can do about that. I'm angry about it." She looked at him in the dark. "And I'm not leaving." He was quiet for a long time. Then he put his arms around her and pulled her against him, and she felt the tension in him, the enormous, tightly coiled tension of a man about to do something that cost him, and she held on. "I'm going to get out," he said, against her hair. "I told you that. I mean it." "I know you mean it," she said. "But not yet." "I know," she said. "I know." Outside, Milan was cold and quiet and dark. Inside, she held the man she loved, and felt the shape of what they were. Complicated, imperfect, real, and she did not let go. Chapter 10, the end of Part 1. 3 days later, everything broke open. She was at the gallery. Normal Tuesday, the provenance research on the Czech painting finally complete, a satisfying afternoon of evidence assembled into argument. She'd texted Nikolai at noon, and got a brief reply. Meeting all day, dinner tonight, 7, and had gone back to work. At 4:30, Victor called her. She stared at Victor's name on her phone screen for a moment. Victor, who had driven her away from the Sorrento estate on the night that started everything. Victor, who she'd seen occasionally since, a quiet presence in Nikolai's world, competent and close-mouthed and apparently loyal to the bone. She answered, "Ms. Cruz." His voice was tighter than usual. "Where are you?" "The gallery." "What?" "Stay there. Don't go outside. Someone will be there in 10 minutes. "Victor, what's happening?" A pause. "There's been a situation. Nikolai he's all right." She'd been about to ask, her heart in her throat. But there was an incident, and until we understand the full scope of it, we're moving everyone. Everyone. People connected to him, people Marchetti's people might use. The cold went down her spine. He said you'd say that, Victor said, and she could hear something in his voice that might, in a different context, have been close to warmth. He said you'd want to come to him. I do want to come to him. I know, the man at the gallery will bring you to him as soon as we've confirmed the situation. A pause. He asked me to tell you he's sorry for the disruption. She almost laughed. Almost. He's sorry for the disruption, she repeated. His words. And there, yes, definitely something like warmth. He's waiting for you. The man arrived in 8 minutes. She grabbed her coat and her bag and locked her office. She looked back at the Czech landscape on her desk, its particular melancholy light, its story of survival through the terrible years. She thought about what Andrei had said. He manages, he'll believe he can manage it. She thought about Nikolai at 3 in the morning, his voice flat and cold and utterly controlled. She thought about "Ya tebya lublю," set against her knuckles in the firelight. She walked out of the gallery into the winter afternoon and got into the car, and the city moved around her, and she was going toward him. She was always going toward him. The car moved through Milan's cold streets toward whatever came next, toward Nikolai, toward the life they were building in the cracks of everything difficult, toward the war that was coming, whether they wanted it or not. She did not look back. Some decisions, once made, are not revisited. Some loves are not reconsidered. Some doors, once closed behind you, are not opened again. She had closed that door in the Sorrento estate 7 months ago. She had not, for a single moment, regretted it.